What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Well, this is why so many people hate this so-called player empowerment era. This is what we have to deal with now, increasingly. Um, and of course, I blame L'Apocalypse and Clutch Sports for starting this. They've been at it for the better part of a decade, just gotten stronger each year with trying to rewrite history, revise history, omit things that we've seen with our own eyes. And it's worked because I hate to say it, but it's worked. To a large extent, it's worked because the powers that be have tried everything they can to stymie us and to diminish us from telling the real truths. Meanwhile, these lies and mistruths and half-truths gets promulgated to the masses. And you're seeing this being now replicated with Caitlin Clark fans, disrespecting the past. Because they only pull this ish in basketball. Because the other sports like hockey, like basketball, like baseball, they are very proud of their history and they cherish their history. You're not going to see these guys making these dumbass takes about Babe Ruth or Ty Cobb or Mickey Mantle, because you know how they feel about their history. But us, we've been taught to disrespect our history, disrespect our elders. And here comes Austin Rivers, who wasn't even good enough to start, if I'm not mistaken, for pretty much his entire career, even though he was a great prospect coming into the league. On his podcast recently, said that if he played in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, he would be a top 20 to 25 all-time player. You heard that correctly. Top 20 to 25 all-time player. Here it goes.
Kids are doing Euro sessions third grade now because they already had access to it. You know what I'm saying? It's just like the evolution of timing of these kids learning things at an earlier age is just, you can't argue it. So Giannis, or bro, if you put myself in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, shit, I'd probably be in Cleveland with like a red coat last year. I would have been on a top 25 player of all time. But that's not a flex. I'm supposed to do that based off of my skill. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. If you gave those guys the same level of skill, the same level of training and know-how, those guys would have been even more supreme players like other.
So what he's basically trying to insinuate is that if he came into the NBA in the 70s and 80s and 90s, as the player that he was when he came to the league, he would be the best player in the NBA. It's pretty much what he's saying. He would have been the best player in 1977. This is the thing about that. So what you're saying is that you were better than from the 70s. Pete Maravich, you'd have been better than Nate Archibald. You've been better than Earl the Pearl Monroe. You've been better than Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Walt Frazier. He's saying he'd been better than those guys. That's pretty much Lenny Wilkins. You've been better than them. Okay, that's what he's saying. He'd been better than Gus Williams. He'd been better than Magic, Isaiah, Stockton, Sidney Moncrief, Mark Price, Dennis Johnson, Derek Harper, Mark Jackson. If I didn't say him, I think I already said it. Dennis Johnson. He'd been better than Gary Payton, Jason Kidd, Penny Hardaway, Allen Iverson, Nick Van Exel, Ron Harper in his prime, Sam Cassell, Rod Strickland, Steve Nash, KJ, AI. You've been better than Kenny Anderson, J.R. Ryder. You've been better than all these guys. Stephon Marbury. You've been better than all these dudes. Come on, man. You weren't even better than your dad. It's just hard for me to understand how, first of all, the rules were different back then. All of the dribble moves that these guys get away with in today's NBA, they've been caught for palming and traveling all the time. So you had to adjust your game. All these free drives to the basket would have been shut down because you would have had a monster in the paint, whether it was Wilt Chamberlain, Artis Gilmore, Bob Lanier, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, or Mark Eaton, Manute Bol, Shaquille O'Neal, Derrick Robinson. They would have roughed your ass up. Okay? So you wouldn't be able to play the same game. You'd have to adjust your game to those rules. All the things that you guys call skill. There's no three-point line back then. Not before 1979-80. So there's no value in shooting outside shots because it's just 2 points. Everything is pushed out to the perimeter today. Everything is geared toward perimeter players. Everything is geared toward guard play. But you weren't good enough to be a starter. You weren't good. Matter of fact, let's see something right quick. Let's look at Austin Rivers. I'm not saying he was a bum. He wasn't. He wasn't a bum. But he wasn't good enough to be a great player in this era. 8.5 points, 2.1 rebounds, 41.9% shooting, 34.9% from downtown, 65% free throw shooting from the line, 9.7 career PER rating. Let's see. His best season, 2016-17 with the Clippers, when he's playing under his father. He only started 29 games that year. The next year he was pretty much a full-time starter. Actually, that was his best year, 2017-18. Started 59 to 61 games. He only played in 61 games. That would have been unacceptable back then. You had to play, you know what I'm saying? You had to play hurt. You guys don't like to do that. He averaged 33.7 minutes. That wouldn't have been cutting it back then. You had to play at least 37, 38 minutes as a starter. Let's see, 15.1 points, 4 assists, 1.2 steals, 42% shooting, 38% from the line, three-point line, 64% from the free throw line. That's not very good for a point guard. I mean, this is the thing, man. Those guys could have done a lot of what these guys did today if they had the freedom to do it. But the game was called more conservatively back then. Oh, they would have called traveling on you motherfuckers back then too. And all that hot dogging, especially in the 70s, all of that so-called was called hot dogging back then. It's called showmanship today, but back then it was called hot dogging. They would have benched your ass. And you guys wouldn't have gotten away with all that crying and complaining. You didn't quite have the freedom that you guys have with free agency. That didn't start till 1977. Oh, and then another thing. You didn't have social media to vent back then. You didn't have social media to vent and tell your side of the story. So the media is going to kill you because they're going to be pro-owner, pro-management, and this little extra thing to put on top of that pie, that adversity pie, the challenge pie, just a splash of racism. Oh, the stuff that you complain about today, oh, no, you got to do a lot more of that, especially back in the 70s and 80s, especially in the 70s. We were just fresh off the civil rights movement. Oh, backlash. Oh, anytime you play in St. Louis Hawks, actually, I think they were out of St. Louis by 1970, but still, if you played, you know what I'm saying, Boston, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Don't have the chartered flights no more. You're not making the millions and millions of dollars back then. You better conserve your money. They weren't paupers, but You want millionaires, and I have all them fine, you ain't had all that fine pussy lying around the country back then. You only made enough. You probably made the same as maybe a successful broker on Wall Street made back then. Yeah, made a good living, but not enough to live these lavish lifestyles. And don't get caught with a white chick accusing you of something back then. Shit. But look, man, I'm not even really taking this seriously because it's getting to the point now you got bums. I'm not saying he was a bum talent-wise, but individually, like statistically, from like what he accomplished in the NBA, I mean, what you call it? Come on, man. You got role players. I'll put it like that. Role players. Role player. I'm not gonna call him a bum. But you got role players now saying they'd be top 20 all-time players. Unbelievable, man. Unbelievable. What do we get? What's going on, man? It's just the cap era, man. We got Trump capping everywhere, Kamala capping in interviews. You know what I'm saying? Steven Jackson capping, talking about he better than top 75 players. Now you got role players saying he's been top 20. Man, these guys need a cap the size of North Carolina on top of their head.